The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Conservative messaging and talking points around the release of prisoner of war Bo Bergdahl has turned completely despicable. And when we talked about this story yesterday, it wasn't totally clear that this had the potential to turn into the Republicans' next Benghazi pseudo-scandal attempt at blowing up the corporate media. But it has, and I'm going to at least try to get ahead of it so that we don't fall into the same situation that we've had with Benghazi. And unfortunately, that may not be preventable. But let's go through this piece by piece. The first argument that the Republicans are making around the release of Bo Bergdahl is that President Obama did not consult with Congress on this. This is absolutely just not true, and you have to be armed with the facts. The Washington Post reported yesterday that an Obama administration official first discussed with senior House Republicans the possibility of swapping these 5 Gitmo detainees from U.S. detention in exchange for Bo Bergdahl. Listen to this. In late November of 2001, according to senior Republican aides, the possible prisoner exchange again came up in January of 2012. After
David, you meant 2011, right?
2011. What did I say?
Not 2001.
Not 2001. Yes, 2011. Absolutely. Thank you, Lewis. I'm just so fired up that I'm feverent around this, Lewis. I thank you for pointing that out. Again, in January of 2012, senior House Republicans send 2 letters to the Obama administration. They want more information about this potential swap. So the idea that no one knew about this until the day it happened is just a lie. Almost 3 years ago, the specifics of this deal were already being discussed. So that's number one. The right wing is also angry that they traded dangerous people for one possible deserting American soldier. Prior to Bergdahl's release, Republican lawmakers were some of Bo Bergdahl's biggest advocates and repeatedly were pressing the Obama administration to do something. In fact, quote, everything within its power to get him returned to the United States. A May 22 press release from Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte says, as part of ongoing efforts to urge the Department of Defense to do all it can to find Sergeant Bo Bergdahl and bring him home safely, Senator Ayotte worked successfully to include a provision in the bill that presses Pakistan to fully cooperate in the search for Sergeant Bergdahl. Did we have no idea about the emails that now are being used as evidence that Bergdahl was a deserter on May 22nd? And all of a sudden now that it's President Obama who organized his release, he's a deserter, and it went completely against anything that President Obama had told Republicans. Lie after lie after lie. Look at John McCain, for example. John McCain on February 18th told CNN's Anderson Cooper that he could see himself supporting such an arrangement for getting Sergeant Bergdahl back, albeit reserving judgment for some of the details. A former Bush administration official also said, the reality here is the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, would have done the exact same thing. This is John Bellinger, who said, quote, I don't see how these particular Taliban officials could ever have been tried in the Southern District of New York, speaking of the released Gitmo detainees. There are certainly some al-Qaeda detainees who committed actual terrorist acts against Americans who perhaps could have been tried in a federal court, but these individuals never could have. And with the winding down of the Afghanistan war, the Bush administration would have done the exact same thing. Listen to this. This is the key point. If you take nothing else from this, don't forget this data. Bellinger stressed that the Bush administration returned something like 500 detainees from Gitmo. The statistics show that about 30% of the 500 detainees released by George W. Bush were potentially engaged in militant activity. Of all of those released by President Obama, only 6%, these 5, were potentially engaged in militant activity. If you believe that President Obama should face consequences for the fact that 6% of the Gitmo detainees he released were involved in potentially militant activity, where were you when George W. Bush released 30% of those Guantanamo detainees who were engaged in potentially militant activity? Where were you? Or did it not matter, Lewis, because it wasn't President Obama who was president then?
That's it. That's all I can think of, David. We have a black Democratic president, Kenyan terrorist, Muslim, alien, shape-shifting lizard, communist, socialist, and then you've just got the great American George Bush. You can't question that.
30%, ladies and gentlemen, of those released from Gitmo under George W. Bush's watch potentially engaged in militant activity. Despicable, just lie after lie after lie from the Republican Party regarding Bo Bergdahl. We now also have John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House. I hope you're sitting down for this BS because it's just getting ridiculous, Lewis. John Boehner now says we need congressional hearings. I can barely even get through this. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. We need congressional hearings to figure out what happened with the release of Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. We already determined that the George W. Bush administration released far more Gitmo detainees that were potentially involved in militant activity than Barack Obama. We already determined that the Obama administration years ago started talking about the trade for Bo Bergdahl with Republicans, yet it still might be too late from this devolving into a Benghazi-like pseudo-scandal. John Boehner saying congressional hearings on the decision to swap Sergeant Bo Bergdahl for 3 Gitmo detainees may be necessary. Boehner saying specifically, it's important that we get clarity in the days and weeks ahead. We need clarity. Yeah. Under U.S. law, the president is required to give 30 days notice and fulfill some other disclosure conditions before you can release prisoners from Gitmo. However, number one, this was discussed years ago with Republicans. Number two, when that law went into effect, President Obama already said security specifics in these types of situations may prevent me from actually honoring that. And it's just yet another attempt at a pseudo-scandal like Benghazi for Republicans. Let's take a step back for a second and look at the Obama scandals that were just poised to bring down his presidency. The birth certificate and President Obama's eligibility failed to produce anything. Fast and Furious failed to turn into the scandal we heard it would. The IRS scandal, where conservative groups were supposedly being scrutinized for being conservative for their nonprofit status, crashed and burned when it was determined that actually only a liberal group lost their nonprofit status. The fighting of the Affordable Care Act through media vilification, through calling it illegal, through appealing it all the way up to the Supreme Court, that failed. The turning of Benghazi into a scandal, well, they're still trying, Lewis, but it is getting close to a failure. Increasingly, people just don't think it was a scandal. And now it is hearings over the Bo Bergdahl release. Does anyone remember that George W. Bush went to war with a country that did nothing to us, based on knowingly trying to falsely link that country's actions to 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, and putting together a knowingly flimsy case about weapons of mass destruction? No Republicans calling for hearings then, but now we need hearings over the IRS. We need hearings over Fast and Furious. Benghazi, there were 13 Benghazis under George W. Bush, and now Bo Bergdahl. It is just the height of absurdity from this obstructionist Republican House.
That's it. That's the part I was going to mention. This is just more obstructionism. It is a complete waste of time. If these hearings actually happen, it's going to be a complete waste of money. And there will be a lot of time, money, and effort put into this. And I think even the vast majority of people involved know that it will go absolutely nowhere.
The third narrative I want to quickly mention related to the Bo Bergdahl release prisoner swap with the 5 Gitmo detainees is the criticism that we're hearing that Bergdahl didn't deserve to be rescued because 6 to 8 people died specifically looking for Bergdahl, and that he was a deserter and we shouldn't have been looking for him in the first place. There's no evidence of that, in spite of the fact that that rumor started. And in spite of the fact that corporate media is now starting to parrot that 6 to 8 different soldiers died specifically because they were looking for Bo Bergdahl. There is no actual evidence that that ever happened. The New York Times has a very interesting article which points out that if you actually review the casualty reports and the military logs from the Afghanistan war, it shows that the actual facts on the ground of these 6 to 8 deaths supposedly attributable to Bo Bergdahl because he deserted and then people went looking for him are really quite murky. In some of these cases, there were deaths in an area where they had been told to be on the lookout for Bo Bergdahl, okay? And while doing patrols, which in part were connected with, let's be aware that this guy Bergdahl might be around, people died, soldiers died, and that's of course tragic. However, to suggest that those same soldiers who died, if it were not for the missing Bergdahl, would have been doing nothing at all, sitting in a completely safe, green zone, fortified type area is ridiculous. And as has been made clear, if they weren't on the lookout for Bergdahl, they would have been doing patrols anyway, because that's what they do. And if you go through, Lewis, each and every one of these alleged deaths linked to Bo Bergdahl, there are no definitive details that really link him to those deaths in the way we're hearing from the corporate and conservative media.
Right. I think the media kind of took this and ran because it was nice and juicy, but we don't really know the story. And you're right about soldiers. I mean, I think it's kind of just par for the course that you're putting your life at risk when you go over there, when you enlist. I don't like people coming up with these stories and circumstances in which it's okay for a soldier to get hurt and killed while over there, and it's okay in certain instances not to.
Well, think about another example, Lewis, where the example would be, well, fine, but they wouldn't have been killed. Yeah.
The exception would be something like friendly fire or complete incompetence on behalf of your fellow soldiers or superiors.
And even in those cases, Lewis, so-called troop supporters are very quick to write that off as the casualties of war. And the reality is, you might go look for someone who is a little disillusioned with what's going on in Iraq or Afghanistan. That's just par for the course as well. And when we hear that, oh, we should look in this area because we might have an injured soldier there, and it turns out that it's an ambush, does the person who made the decision to go into that area get blamed for any of those deaths? Or do we say, well, these things happen in war? The hypocrisy and double standard around this is just unbelievable.
It is, right. People are using this at their convenience, and it's sickening.
Last week, I played this video for you, or it might have even been earlier this week, in the last few shows, of this group, Open Carry Texas. It's a group in Texas that likes to take their assault-style rifles strapped on them and cameras and go to restaurants and stores and assert their constitutional right to bring guns there. We played video of them going to a Sonic fast food restaurant and getting kicked out, and it became a whole thing. Now, the NRA, which rarely makes a logical comment, rarely supports anything but more guns in more places, actually said, you know what? The Open Carry Texas group that brought the guns into the Sonic restaurant, quote, crossed the line from enthusiasm to downright foolishness. And this was followed up by the NRA's lobbying arm called the Institute for Legislative Action, which actually publicly denounced the tactics that were employed, saying that they were weird and even scary. This didn't go well. This didn't go well at all, Lewis, because the backlash from the gun nuts who think it's actually pretty logical to spend your days filming people bringing assault-style rifles into restaurants just because they can to make political points, they flipped out on the NRA, and they actually forced the NRA to make an apology. The NRA ended up saying, you know what? There was some confusion around the statement. All it was one person's personal opinion. We retract it. We didn't mean it. It's not weird. It's not scary. It's not foolishness to just strap guns to yourself to make a political point and go to fast food restaurants and make people uncomfortable. How can anyone honestly not realize that the NRA is a terrible organization that can't say anything even remotely reasonable without getting bashed by their own members?
Right. It seems like the people running the NRA generally are just trying to sell as many guns as possible. And then you have the people who make up the members who are essentially these groups of people. I feel like this group is the epitome of the NRA.
They basically said, hey, we're for gun rights. We're for more guns in more places. We're for more guns in schools. We're for increasing the number of guns sold, regardless of how many deaths that leads to. But just going in with assault rifles to Sonic might be a little bit weird. How dare you, NRA? You are the equivalent of gun-grabbing Obama, because you said that might have been just stepping a little bit too far. And then the NRA shrivels and just says, they go completely flaccid, Lewis, saying, oh, no. It was a misunderstanding. It's not weird at all to just bring guns to Sonic and then film it. Just if you have an NRA membership, it's time to cancel that membership. And I know that we have many people in our audience who do have NRA memberships. Let's take a break. Patriot Mail today and a lot more. Glad you're with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember, you can support our show by doing all of your Amazon shopping through the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com. It's on the right side of our website. Click it, bookmark it, use it whenever you shop on Amazon to support our program. You can also become a David Pakman Show member, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberal Bias, as you know, the more you look for it, the more you find it. And you can find it in some pretty unexpected places at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Noah Ferguson. Noah, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. I was also thrilled to hear from member Randy today, who said, David, I could not be happier with my membership. Your recent interviews have been consistently superior. You can join both Noah and Randy as a member and get a free t-shirt and a free bumper sticker by going to davidpakman.com/summertime14. That deal ends Monday, so take advantage of that. davidpakman.com/summertime14. Today is Wednesday, and I don't want to delay today's Patriot Mail any longer.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Patriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that new study which showed, not that surprisingly, to be honest, that about 1 in 4 adults around the world hold pretty significant anti-Semitic beliefs. Just reporting that study led to a barrage of anti-Semitic comments, emails, questions, etc. One of them is from a habitual patriot, as we will call them. And they regularly write about all sorts of problems that are apparent on this show, of course, connected to me being Jewish. And this is a Patriot Mail from them. Let's take a listen to this. This is the return of anti-Semitism to Patriot Mail.
I've got some bad news for you. Hey, Jew, I've got some bad news for you. Lol. More and more people are waking up. When the time comes, where are you going to run? Lol.
Yeah, you know, it's actually, we regularly get emails, Lewis, from people who say, you know, pretty soon people are going to try to kick the Jews out of wherever they are again. And actually, that's, historically speaking, they're probably right. It does seem to happen time and time again. And it's because of people like them.
It is. This was one of my favorite Patriot Mails of all time, though. I just like how the laugh out louds were pronounced and read out loud. It was just great. Overall, very well done.
You know, completely nuanced and really captured the insanity of that viewer. This is a really strange story. A failed Republican who tried to get elected as a Republican a couple of times and failed because he says his name, Scott Fistler, was not conducive to getting elected as a Republican, changed his name to Cesar Chavez, and is now also running as a Democrat. This is just ridiculous. This is the Phoenix City Council in Arizona. And the man formerly known as Scott Fistler is going to be running to fill Congressman Ed Pastor's seat in the heavily Hispanic 7th Congressional District. Ed Pastor, a Democrat, is now going to have a challenger named Cesar Chavez, also a Democrat, formerly Republican Scott Fistler. He actually said that because of his real name, Scott Fistler, he experienced many hardships. The funniest thing about all this is that his website, his campaign website, has pictures of people marching with big Chavez signs, and they're not marching for Scott Fistler, and they're not marching for Cesar Chavez. They're marching for the deceased Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, and the pictures are now being used on Cesar Chavez's website, whose real name, or former name, is Scott Fistler. Have you ever seen anything this absurd, by the way, and offensive to Hispanic voters?
David, this is as ridiculous as it gets. I know why this man lost all of his elections already, and I know why he's going to lose his next one.
This is that Republican outreach to Hispanics that we keep hearing about. What they're doing is changing their names to sound Hispanic. That's the big news. And I just don't know that it's going to work.
David, maybe I'll change my name to Vladimir Lenin, try running for office and see what happens.
In completely unrelated news, Bernie Sanders has changed his name to Ronald Reagan and will be running as a Republican in the 2016 election. I wonder if that would work. I mean, it's just the idiocy of this is incredible. And this guy, Scott Fistler, has changed his name to Cesar Chavez. Just I don't even know what else to say about it. It kind of writes itself. It's like an Onion story.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like it should be an Onion story, David, but truth is stranger than fiction.
Europe recently held parliamentary elections, and they saw some significant victories for xenophobic, anti-Semitic, and otherwise extreme candidates. There are 77 new MEPs from xenophobic parties, which is up 50% from 5 years ago. This is not totally surprising in Belgium, where we've seen significant anti-Semitic protests. We saw the shooting going on, the shooting that went on at the Jewish Museum, I believe it was. But we're even seeing this in France, where the National Front Party, which is a far-right party, has won a nationwide election for the first time. Also, extremist parties made some gains in UK, Denmark, Austria. However, the consensus seems to be, the good news here is that most of these xenophobic, anti-Semitic groups, these extremist groups, much like here in the US, they don't agree with each other's reasons for being xenophobic or anti-Semitic, so it's unlikely that they'll really coalesce into any kind of powerful entity. And I guess, Lewis, that's where we can say it's a good thing that there are so many different ridiculous and absurd extremist ideas that it causes them to disagree with each other. Kind of like when extremists in the US don't agree about why we should be against gay marriage. Is it because it's what Jesus said? Or is it because lesbians get more diseases? Or what's the reason why? And the division amongst extremism, mostly because it's not based in any kind of actual fact, prevents them from really uniting in any way that would be powerful.
Right. I guess that's true. It's still unfortunate that ultimately they all share the same sentiment, and that is that Jews are a problem. But I guess it's...
Or Muslims, you know, I mean, in a lot of these countries, we're seeing that Muslims are a problem thing. And a lot of these we're seeing, well, actually, it's multiculturalism that's the problem. So it really does run the gamut.
It does. I guess it's kind of good to know that in countries all over the world, not just in the United States, people's fear is being capitalized on.
Yeah, I'll say. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Next, we will talk to Mark Weinstein about the NSA, internet surveillance, social media, consequences for having too much information out there, and much more. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Mark Weinstein, who's a privacy advocate, author, also founder of Sgrouples.com. That's SGROUPLES.com. Mark, it's great to have you here. You know, sometimes when issues become very polarized and widely reported in corporate media, we conflate unrelated issues. So one example of this is with GMOs. We've seen somewhat of a conflation of the safety and health of eating GMOs and the labeling of GMOs. When it comes to privacy, I feel like we're seeing something similar when it comes to, on the one hand, kind of sensible online social media privacy that everybody should be aware of, and that being conflated with NSA surveillance, Edward Snowden, etc. So let's start at the very broadest point. Is there anything one can do when it comes to their kind of personal online privacy that would in any way affect what we've been talking about more broadly regarding the NSA and broader government surveillance? Or are they truly two completely separate and unrelated things?
You know, David, that's interesting because when you look at the government, you want to look at where does the government get most of their information from? And the government gets their information from a carrier, you know, as we saw with the Verizon phone records, with Google, with Facebook. And then you want to look at, well, then what do those companies know about me and why do they know it? So there's really, it's sort of like even with the GMO, you want to look back to, well, where did the genetic engineering happen? So, and here, you know, where is my data baked into a packet that's available for the NSA, never mind any advertiser in the world and all the data brokers, and my data is aggregated into a packet at Facebook, and it's aggregated into a packet at Google. So we want to look back at where does the genetic engineering take place? And it's in social media. You know, Facebook is actually tracking us at 1,205 of the top 2,510 most popular websites in the United States. You know, Twitter's even tracking us almost 900 of those 2,500. So you look at what does Google know? Remember, Google finally admitted that they read every email. You know, their algorithm does, and then they're deciding everything. They know everything about me, what my hobbies are, all the emails I've written, all the YouTube videos I've watched, all the searches I've done, all my passwords. So, you know, really, is there something we can do? Absolutely. It's start to get smart about social media, where the genetic engineering takes place at, you know, in the first blush.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff is kind of common sense, right? And we increasingly see people who, for example, for work purposes, they might just not be on Facebook at all, or if they're on Facebook, they use their first and middle name rather than having their last name on there, and that type of thing. But really, when we're talking about government surveillance, it's happening at a much higher level, right? So just putting your middle name on Facebook so your coworkers can't find you, that is not going to have any impact on the government's ability to collect your data.
That's right. That's right. Listen, you know, really, I'm not telling everybody to. And first of all, when you start using Facebook in a fake way, it defeats the purpose of social media, and that's what we're seeing now. So from the incredible era of being uncensored on Facebook because it was brand new and sexy and everybody was doing it, now there's something called after the ecstasy, the laundry. So now, with all the laundry of Facebook, people losing their jobs, kids not getting into schools, relationships being ruined, cyberbullying, suicide, all these things. So now we're all censoring ourselves on Facebook. So when we look at Facebook, we're not seeing a real person's life, really. We're seeing a very sort of, nurtured, a cultured, a censored view of somebody. And if they're using their first name or middle initial or whatever, still the NSA can see where that person is coming from. And remember, Facebook is still spying on everything you're doing. It doesn't matter how tight you batten down the hatches at Facebook and believe in their baloney about their privacy, because there is no privacy at Facebook, because they're spying on everything that we're doing, everything.
Yeah, and to be clear, I want to make sure the audience knows, Scruples is kind of its own social network, and anybody who watches this program, we have a very skeptical audience. It'll be very apparent to people that some of your criticism of Facebook could, of course, be couched under the umbrella of wanting to promote your alternative to Facebook, right?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I'm sorry. No way. No way. So this is reality. So this is regardless. This is separate from my social network, which we're not even talking about.
Good. Yeah, no, I wasn't, Mark, to be clear, I wasn't issuing a criticism of you. I just see what will happen is my audience will email me and they'll say, David, it's irresponsible not to at least mention that he does have his own social network. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely, David. Absolutely. Look, it's in the background. It's right there. I'm a privacy advocate, right?
Yeah.
And for everybody, and David, you too, I think you know this. I'm one of the founders of social media. So in 1998, I built one of the first great social media companies, superfamily.com, superfriends.com. We were PC Magazine Top 100 companies 3 years in a row. And, when Mark Zuckerberg said in 2010 that privacy is a social norm of the past, I was shocked because we live in democracy. North America, we have the greatest democracy in the world, and privacy is in the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
Our founding forefathers, understood privacy, hundreds of years before social media. And I was very comfortable. I had moved on from social media. I had written 4 books on greatness. That was a turning point in my life. I said, wait a minute, we cannot accept that privacy is just gone just because, Mark Zuckerberg says so. And so absolutely. So I endeavored to move to Silicon Valley and to build a brand new, really advanced social media company where people can really love sharing and really love hanging out together. Their uncensored selves with privacy they trust. We don't track, we don't use facial recognition, we don't own your content. Remember, Facebook, these other companies, they own your content too. That's a little bit creepy and strange. So,
yeah,
absolutely. But what I'm pointing to really is, first of all, do we really have a defense against the NSA? If the NSA wants to find out something about you, it seems like they're able to do it. If they can, spy on Anna Merkel's phone calls, the premier of Germany, the prime minister, then of course they can find out about us. But on the other hand, they can't figure out where this Malaysian airplane is. And if you're not using social media, if you're using something like Scruples, where we're not tracking and aggregating data on you, then we have nothing to hand over to the NSA when they come knocking at the back door and looking for all those packets of information. So, where's the packet of information about David Pakman? Well, we don't have a packet of information about David Pakman because we have no tracking cookies.
Hey, out of curiosity, how many members does Scruples have? How big is your social network?
We are we're just about to go viral. So we're just rolling out our viral mechanisms. So right now we have over 100,000 registered and invited users, almost 140,000. Which is amazing because we have not rolled out our viral mechanism, our member link system. And so we've been in development getting feedback from this beta cluster of members and what they want and what they love. Because remember, I love social media. I love the ability to communicate around the world with people that I know. And that's what Scruples is for. It replicates real life. It's for your real life. It's not for the whole world.
Hey, Mark, in the limited time we have left, I want to touch on something you've written about, and it's a story we've covered, which is that in Europe, it has been determined by courts that you have the right to petition Google to eliminate certain search results from their algorithm. And this, of course, is interesting because you might have something in your now more distant past that maybe would be unsavory to a potential employer or whatever the case may be. I don't know how to get my head around my position on this because on the one hand, there's plenty of incorrect information on the internet about me. At the same time, though, if there's, for example, a public arrest record that is public, there is no inaccuracy in that arrest record, but maybe I would prefer, right, that it not be available to a potential employer. Does it really make sense to tell Google to remove it from their search results when it's not their website? They're simply telling you this data exists out there. I don't really know what position to take on this.
David, I think you're speaking exactly to the concern. And you're right, I wrote about this in HuffPost, and I am a major privacy advocate, as obvious. And I think the European Commission made a huge mistake. I think it's wrong to give people the right to curate what you can find out about them on Google, because let's say, you're a stalker, you're a criminal, you're a child molester, you're a burglar, whatever, and now you can tell Google, in Europe, by the way, this is not in the United States, only in Europe, you could say to Google, hey, take that off, that's not allowed to come up in your searches on me. I mean, this is privacy gone the wrong way. So,
well, the issue is that it can be manipulated, right? The Google algorithm can be manipulated, so you can actually put out there deliberately false information. And I just question whether we should be going after Google. Is it Google's responsibility to curate accuracy, or is it really the responsibility of the website hosting the false information to either have to back it up or not? It seems to be wrong to put Google in the middle of it necessarily.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and it's expensive. And in this case, what I believe is people should be able to curate tagged photos, social media conversations about them, but not public data, arrest records, violations, things like that. Anything that's really in the public domain, people should not have the right to tell Google, you can't turn this up in your searches on me. That's misleading and will lead to huge mistrust, in relationships, in careers, everywhere. I mean, Google has to be able to be independent, even though the flip side of this is Google does curate their searches based on what they think you want to see when you do a search.
Sure, but I guess that we could say the algorithm should be consistent in that sense. We've been speaking with Mark Weinstein. The website is scruples.com, SGROUPLES.com. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm not always able to bring you good news on this program, but today we actually have some pretty good news from a new poll from Public Policy Polling, which finds that carbon emission reduction standards suggested by President Obama earlier this week are actually looked at pretty favorably by most Americans, and it seems that many Americans would not vote for a presidential candidate that denies the connection between human activities on Earth and climate change. This is a good thing. Voters support the 30% reduction standard in carbon emissions by an 18-point margin, 53 to 35. I know it's not overwhelming. It should probably be like 90 to 10, but it's still something. And the other interesting part of this study is that voters, particularly independents, don't have much tolerance for climate skeptics when it comes to the 2016 presidential race. Listen to these numbers. Only 38% of voters say they'd be willing to support a candidate who doesn't believe that climate change is caused by human activity. And by an 11-point margin, they would be less likely to vote for such a candidate. This is good. And I really hope it means that in 2016, even Republicans will have to come up with some kind of carefully crafted position where they don't deny the connection between human activity and climate change, but they can make some kind of small government argument as to why we should do nothing about it. But even still, Lewis, 38% is still kind of high for the number of voters that would vote for a president that denies that connection. I don't know if I should be happy that it's less than 50% or distraught that it's almost 40%.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of like the idea of what the claim this poll is making, David. But unfortunately, whoever ends up in office is going to be put there by companies who have a vested interest in making sure that nothing happens when it comes to our climate problems.
And I don't think we would see any big 180s from Republicans. Like I said, they might accept that the connection is scientifically based, but they would give you a long laundry list of reasons, including small government and government intervention and blah, 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 for why absolutely nothing should be done about the connection that science has shown us exists. Here's something interesting around the terminology used to talk about climate change. We've talked about how the term global warming often leads to Fox and Friends doing a story about how, hey, there's no global warming because in North Dakota in winter it was really, really cold, or it snowed in DC on the day they were going to have some global warming hearings. So as a general thing, I've been using the term climate change, which encompasses the long-term change of the climate over many decades, and it relates to more erratic climate and more extreme weather events, rather than just talking about warming, because I feel that it better encompasses what we're talking about. Unfortunately, a couple of different studies, including one called What's in a Name? Global Warming versus Climate Change, which is based on 2 nationally representative surveys, suggests that actually global warming is a more effective term at catalyzing people. And what this basically looked at is, how do people interpret the seriousness of global warming / climate change depending on how on which term is used. And it seems, without boring you with all of the details, we'll link to them on YouTube and on our website. What's clear is that when the term global warming is used, even though in many ways it is not as accurate of a term to describe what we're experiencing, people more strongly believe that we, A, have a problem, and B, that it needs to be acted upon. So I'm really at a crossroads on this, Lewis, because I believe that the term global warming, number one, is not as accurate, and number two, lends itself to a lot of it was cold on this particular day in this particular place type of stuff on Fox News and other conservative media. But at the same time, it seems to also resonate in a more significant way with many people.
Right. I guess we just have to try and make sure that climate change has the same impact, has the same effect on people, because it does make more sense to use the term climate change, doesn't it?
No question about it. So send me your thoughts on this. This is a bit of a double-edged sword, and I'm not totally sure the best way forward around this. I still think climate change is the more accurate term, in the same way that corporate media is more accurate than mainstream media, although it may lead to less understanding amongst our audience. I don't know. Let's go to your voicemail. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here's a comment on Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, becoming an attorney for a really big natural gas company in Ukraine.
Yes, I thought I'd call, just watch the show in reference to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. I think you missed the point this time. The fact that Joe Biden's boy is an attorney for the gas and oil is surely far more disturbing than the fact that there might be a conflict of interest. Joe should be ashamed of himself that he allowed his boy to be into that industry, and the fact that he's an attorney.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know. Number one, I don't know if just being an attorney is something for Joe Biden to be ashamed of his son doing. I don't know that, the voicemail says Joe Biden should never have allowed his son to do that. His son is an adult. I don't know how viable it is to just say Joe Biden has total control over his son because he's the vice president or whatever. But certainly I think that the point is valid, that why is Hunter Biden in this position, and is there a conflict of interest, is a completely valid question to be asking. Let's go to one more voicemail today.
Hey, yeah, I just want to make a point about the army guy who was freed. All these Republicans want to talk about how also conservative, they want to push the Bible down our throats. But then when something like this happens, all of them want to say, oh, we should have left him to die with his terrorist buddies. But then they want to push their religious beliefs on us. But then as soon as this happens, something like this, they forget all about their religious ideas, and that's it.
Yeah, it's a good point, which is where in the so-called Christian foundation of the military that so many right-wingers claim exists in direct violation to separation of church and state, where in there does it say that if one of your comrades was maybe somewhat disillusioned with what we were doing in that country, we just leave them behind? Like, what's Christian about that, Lewis?
As far as I know, nothing. But then
Okay.
again, I'm not Christian. David, I don't practice.
Yeah. All right. So very, very good point from a viewer in Brooklyn, actually. Very, very good to hear from you. On today's bonus show, the godfather of ecstasy has died. We will also talk about a terrible find. This is a horrible story at a former Irish home for single mothers. And also the Secret Service wants to develop software that will detect sarcasm. As you can imagine, when you do keyword searches on the internet to figure out who you should be paying attention to, if you can't detect sarcasm, you're going to come up with a lot of false positives. So we'll talk about all that and more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up for the bonus show and all other member benefits. Or until Monday, get a free t-shirt and bumper sticker with that membership by going to davidpakman.com/summertime14.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.